This podcast is meant for informational purposes only and is not meant to serve as investment advice. Hosts and guests may hold cryptocurrencies discussed in this episode. Opinions expressed may not reflect the opinions of Messari.
In 2024, Web3 gaming hit new heights, recording nearly 8 million daily on-chain active addresses in mid-October. Yet most blockchain games today are only partially on-chain, relying on centralized servers to manage the game's logic and state. Fully on-chain games take a different approach. By putting logic and state on-chain, these games unlock the full creative potential of blockchains. In addition to the landmark Web3 benefit of asset ownership, these games enable perpetual gameplay, permissionless extensibility, and seamless interoperability of players' on-chain identities. But despite their immense potential, fully on-chain games have struggled to scale. High transaction costs, slow block times, and poor user experiences have kept these games largely confined to niche audiences. But a game called Pirate Nation is charting a new course. Driven by infrastructure advancements developed by the game studio Proof of Play, this pirate-themed RPG has processed over 350 million transactions across more than 300,000 addresses. So, with scalability seemingly solved for, can Pirate Nation be the first fully on-chain game to gain widespread adoption? I'm Chris Davis, and here's the story.
This episode of Unqualified Opinions is brought to you by Hirechain. Your next hire could come from anywhere: a recruiter, a job board, a referral network, or a conference. Hirechain manages hundreds of candidate sources for you, so you only see relevant applications and can focus on picking the best person for your team. On average, our customers fill open roles faster and 30% cheaper than with traditional recruiters. Leading companies like The Graph and Messari already use Hirechain. So get your time back. Talk to Hirechain today and hire the best, fast. Visit hirechain.io/Messari for prioritized onboarding.
Hi, Chris. Welcome back to the pod.
Hey, how's it going?
Like you say in the introduction, there is no shortage of interest in Web3 gaming, and on-chain active addresses recently reached new highs. But the holy grail is fully on-chain games, and a lot of these games right now are not fully on-chain. So, what are the key benefits of putting a game fully on-chain, and why do you think it's been so challenging for these fully on-chain games to reach a broader audience?
Yeah, so if you think about Web3 games in general, what basically the landmark component of it is asset ownership. So a lot of these partially on-chain games, they have the assets, so they'll have the NFTs, they'll have the tokens on-chain, but the actual game logic isn't encoded into smart contracts and the state isn't updated. So when you're able to put the actual logic into smart contracts and the state, it unlocks a lot of really creative things that developers can do on top of the game. So developers can look at these smart contracts and actually build worlds on top of it. So being able to call functions from the smart contracts, they can build a game. They can take the entire player's on-chain identity, which is recorded on the smart contract, and port it into new games and new extensions on top of it. In addition to that, you have the permanence of the blockchain. So as long as the underlying blockchain keeps on running, the game will actually be able to run in perpetuity. So this overcomes a lot of the challenges that we've seen with centralized games, where you might make all this progress in the game, but if the studio decides to stop paying the server fees, the game goes down, you lose all your progress, and it's like you never played it. So I think those are some of the main core benefits of it, is really the extensibility, the interoperability, and the permanence of the game. Now, this has been a challenge in the past. I think it really has to do with infrastructure development. And so there were a lot of areas in previous cycles that it just wasn't possible to do these things. So like this extends into even decentralized social, right? Like being able to log every single interaction from a social media perspective on chain was just impossible with the infrastructure at the time. This is very similar, where you have a really high frequency of transactions going through the blockchain. So if you're building on something like Ethereum, this is obviously, you need a game that is very low transaction, which definitely limits the type of games that you'd be able to play, because every time you're submitting a transaction as a player, you're paying Ethereum gas fees. You're waiting for Ethereum settlement time, right? So now that there's been more infrastructural developments, it really expands the world of fully on-chain games and overcomes a lot of these scalability issues that we've seen in the past couple of years.
Got it. So tell me about Pirate Nation. How has Pirate Nation been able to overcome these limitations? And what advancements has proof of play introduced specifically to make this possible?
So there's three big, I'd say, quality of life advancements that proof of play has made so that Pirate Nation can scale. First off, it's the underlying infrastructure that they're built on top of. So you have two chains. They're based on Arbitrum Orbit stack. So they use AnyTrust for their DA. So they're incredibly high throughput and incredibly low cost. So they have two chains as part of the multi-chain ecosystem that they're creating. And these are able to process transactions at sub-cent per transaction. And so it allows this game to be really scalable to a wide player base without costing a lot of money. The game was actually previously built on Polygon, and they realized very quickly that this wouldn't be sustainable for the gameplay that they were trying to bring to the audience. And then the second one, like two of the really big issues in Web3 gaming have been, first off, signing transactions. So having a transaction pop up every time you need to submit something to the chain. And second is the gas fees. So even though the gas fees are pretty low on Apex Chain and Boss Chain, the two chains part of the multi-chain, they've actually abstracted all of this away. So they pay for the gas for the players. So the player doesn't have to worry about gas at all during the gameplay. And they've also abstracted away the signatures. So when you create an account for Pirate Nation, you sign in with your main wallet, but then you're also given on the back end another wallet that signs all of the transactions for you as you play the game. So this enables a type of experience that is really Web 2-like. Really the only Web 3 part that you have is when you're originally making an account and signing up for the game. After that, you're playing just like a Web 2 game. And then the third part is more for the developer process. So fully on-chain games are still a very new type of development process. And there's not even so many smart contract developers out there in total. So getting developers to build fully on-chain games in a new way that's really complex it's kind of a hard sell. So what they've developed is they have a fully on-chain game engine. And this isn't released to external developers yet, but they're planning on releasing this. So developers can just go in and have a very familiar developer environment with all the tools they need to start building fully on-chain games. So when you think about the benefits of fully on-chain games, like what we discussed, like one of the main benefits is from the developer's perspective and building on this game and making it extensible through developers. So this third issue that they tackle with their on-chain engine, that's what's going to allow this game to really scale past just what the team builds into an entire universe that's around Pirate Nation.
Before we get into more about Pirate Nation, how applicable will their scalability breakthrough be to other fully on-chain games? Will it unlock these?
Yeah, so I think first off, Pirate Nation is setting the bar for what's possible. So I think when you're building fully on-chain games, you can look to Pirate Nation as an example of this is how you develop really solid infrastructure that can support scalability to hundreds of thousands of addresses and potentially millions of players. I think that as a whole, the infrastructure that powers Pirate Nation is part of Arbitrum's stack, right? So this is just a general development framework that other developers of fully on-chain games can choose to build through. And I think that we're starting to see these advancements become very commonplace. So we have high throughput chains, we have L2s that are able to offload DA to data availability committees off chain and then prove it on chain. So all of this is reducing the cost and the latency of blockchain transactions. So I think that what they're doing, it can be replicated through other games, definitely. And I think that we are starting to turn around this corner where if you're building a fully on-chain game, this is going to be the standard of how you build it.
And what about the gameplay in Pirate Nation itself? What are your thoughts on how the game plays and how do the Web3 economic elements fit into the overall experience?
So the game, it really has a lot of the landmark characteristics that you'd expect from an RPG. So you have your pirate, you can send them on quests, you can go explore the seas and like battle monsters and get resources. They have trading. So I think when you're playing the game, it feels very familiar. Like if you've played RPGs in the past, you kind of understand these core game loops and understand how to progress throughout the game. Um, it's kind of semi-casual. So like the quests are very passive. Those just run on a timer in the background. The combat is more active. It's a card-based battler, so turn-based card game. And the exploration is kind of like what you typically expect from an RPG, where you're kind of sailing around, you're finding different resources, going to different islands. So yeah, it's very familiar for players. The Web3 aspect starts to come in with the trading. So if you take the trading element of a gameplay, which in a normal RPG, you'd be trading in game, at some sort of exchange maybe. But in Pirate Nation, you can export the items that you have in game. So, part of the game is building ships. Say you build a ship, right? You can export that as an NFT once you reach rank 10. And then you can trade that on the proof of play marketplace for other players, with other players. So that's where the Web3 element starts to come into it. And on top of this NFT trading, you have three currencies that really power the economics of the game. So you have P Gold, which is the soft currency of the game. You have Gems, which is the quote unquote hard currency of the games. And then you have Pirate, which is the ERC20 of Pirate Nation. So there's different sinks and faucets in place for these. P Gold is typically the currency it's the most applicable to the everyday gameplay of actually playing the game. So, when you're entering hard mode on combat, you're using P Gold, right? You're using P Gold to go on certain bounties. And it has all these sinks and faucets in game that try to balance it out so that your gameplay progression is balanced with the actual tokenomics of P Gold. Gems, which can be purchased with Pirate and only with Pirate, those help you advance in the game a little bit quicker. So you'll have quests, say you have X amount of resources you need to complete this quest. You can use gems to top off those resources. You can use gems to speed up quest timers. So this is kind of like an added benefit for people who want to spend Pirate to advance further throughout the game. They can buy these gems and then use them. The team has adjusted the price of gems individually to try to balance this economy, because one of the hardest parts about literally any economy, Web2 gaming economy as well, is just balancing the resources with the amount of currency that's going through, with the progression that the players are actually making throughout the game, and trying to balance these three things. This becomes especially hard when you have outside forces that act upon the currency. So Pirate, for example, it's not a huge part of the game right now in terms of the actual in-game gameplay, but it is required to buy gems. So the amount of Pirate that's being spent on these gems, that's going to influence the gameplay and the way that users use these gems in game, which then impacts the P Gold, and it has ramifications on the entire economy. So all these three work together through these sinks and faucets that the team is constantly updating to make a balanced Web3 economy.
So just dialing back to what you said earlier about that the game feels very familiar, right? To players who regularly play these type of games. It sounds from that Pirate Nation has a lot of potential to resonate with a wide audience. How much adoption has the game seen so far, and what does the outlook for future growth look like?
Yeah, so for a Web3 game especially, it's had really good adoption so far. When the game was first launched, it was on different chains. It had a couple thousand users. Once they started kicking off their airdrop campaign for Pirate and started to hint at that and have their original preseason, the player count skyrocketed. So it went from about a couple thousand players all the way up to about over 80,000 players, right? And what's kind of typical of like when you adjust certain economics in the game, so whether it's an airdrop is finished or you tweak something about like, say, the price of gems, it can influence the way that people earn in the game, obviously, which can then influence the retention of players. So what's really interesting is that post their airdrop, they've actually been able to retain players very well and at a pretty steady rate. So if you look at the actual adoption curve, you have a bit of a spike post airdrop, then you have a bit of a change in the game's economics, and then you start to see the new entrants in the game start to decline. So you can tell this by players who mint marks, which is the P Gold equivalent that you get before you reach rank 10. So people who are minting that in game. And then you have the people who are minting P Gold, meaning that they've already reached rank 10. So if you look, the amount of players have stabilized at around 50,000 players. And the percentage of people who are minting P Gold is going up against the amount of players that are minting marks. So to me, this indicates that they have developed a core player base that is dedicated to this game and wants to progress through the game. So what it's really going to come down to in the future is they need to learn how to like drive up that incremental demand from new players coming into the game, which I think that their core players that are already in the game and making progress, they'll be able to retain.
Last question. In the report, you highlight two key aspects of Pirate Nation's go-to-market strategy. Its alignment with major industry trends on the one hand, and on the other hand, the team's focus on building a strong community. Can you share how these two elements contribute to the game's long-term growth potential?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think being within accelerating trends in an industry, just kind of aside from a specific go-to-market within these trends, is really important. So what we've seen, the two trends that they're very tapped into is a mobile-first development and then user-generated content. So we can just touch on mobile first. So right now the game is only available for browser, but when they were developing the game, they developed it with mobile in mind. And mobile is set to be released at some point in 2025. So they've made these optimizations around the game and they're getting, set to release it. Mobile gaming is taking up the lion's share of revenue as well as players. So you're aligning yourself with a growing player base and also the most revenue out of different consoles and platforms that you can play on. And this makes a lot of sense. Technology is advancing in places that have typically been underserved by, say, console or PC. So mobile was the first gaming platform introduced to people in certain nations. So we're seeing this trend accelerate and we're seeing more revenue being given to mobile in relationship to PC and console. So aligning within that trend, and then also user-generated content. This is something that we've seen within the past couple of years be a really effective way to scale network effects. So if we look at something like Fortnite was a game that introduced user-generated content into it after launch. They have Fortnite Creative. At this point, I think it was in 2023, Epic Games announced that 40% of all game time was spent in their UGC Fortnite Creative mode. So as Pirate Nation continues to grow, fully on-chain gaming, one of the huge benefits is it is very user-generated content friendly. And I think that we'll see this from them where if they have this focus on creating the developer tools that allow developers to easily build on top of the game and then promoting user-generated content to their community, this can kickstart a really powerful network effects that can bring more players into the game. As developers come in, they build better experiences, it attracts more players, which then developers can view that as a distribution channel to get their work out. So those two areas as overarching trends that they're positioned in. And then specifically how the team has tackled building community, I think is, in my opinion, it's one of the strongest strategies I've seen in this space, where they're in the Discord, they're talking to their players, they release updates to the game once a week, and they're immediately gathering player feedback and then iterating on those results that they get back from the community. So as opposed to, building a product release over, say, the course of a couple months and then releasing it and not really knowing how it's going to impact the player's experience with the game and how it's going to be received, they're getting constant feedback. So the iteration loop that they have when they're building out the product is really quick. And I think that's obviously great from a development perspective. And it's also really great for making the community feel like they are a part of the journey. So when players are getting new builds and they're talking to the developers directly, that's going to increase retention because they're going to have more emotional investment in this game, building a stronger community, making connections with people. So I think this positioning within accelerating trends in the industry in general, mixed with how they're building their kind of micro core player base, is really positioning them to see accelerated growth in the coming months.
Chris, that was awesome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much. This episode was produced by Steve Bichimer, based on my report, X Marks the Spot, A Landlubber's Guide to Pirate Nation. for Masari Pro in November 2024. To read more about fully on-chain games, Pirate Nation, and Web3 gaming, please consider subscribing to Masari Pro at masari.io.